Robert Keller stood at the window of Memorial General Hospital's 6th floor, staring blankly at the city skyline. His son Alex lay in the private room behind him, pale and thin against the white sheets. The doctors had just left after delivering the news Robert had been dreading. The latest round of treatments wasn't working. "We've exhausted our standard protocols, Mr. Keller," Dr. Watkins had said, his voice carefully neutral. "Alex's condition is progressing faster than we anticipated. I've consulted with specialists across the country, but this particular variant of autoimmune disorder is proving challenging." Robert pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Challenging. A polite way of saying they were watching his son die while he stood by helplessly. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who had built a tech empire from nothing, who controlled resources most people couldn't imagine, powerless to save the one person who mattered most. His phone buzzed, another message from the office about tomorrow's board meeting. Robert silenced it without looking. 6 months ago, he would have considered that meeting essential. Now, it seemed meaningless. "I need some air," he muttered to the nurse checking Alex's vitals. She nodded sympathetically as he stepped into the hallway. The hospital corridor was quiet, with only the occasional beep of equipment breaking the silence. Robert took the elevator to the ground floor and pushed through the glass doors to the small garden area outside the main entrance. Spring was beginning to touch the trees with green, but he barely noticed. He sat on a bench and buried his face in his hands. For the first time since the diagnosis 3 months ago, Robert felt the weight of defeat pressing down on him. He had thrown money at the problem, the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, experimental protocols that weren't available to the general public. None of it had mattered. "Excuse me." The voice was so soft that Robert almost didn't hear it. He looked up to see a teenage girl standing a few feet away. She was thin, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes, jeans, sneakers, and a faded blue hoodie, had seen better days. "I'm busy," Robert said dismissively. The hospital attracted all kinds of people looking for handouts, and he wasn't in the mood. "Sir, I know how to save your son." The words hung in the air between them. Robert stared at her, anger rising in his chest. "That's not funny. Who put you up to this?" The girl didn't back away as most people did when confronted with his temper. "Nobody. I'm serious. Alex has type B refractory autoimmune disorder with a typical T-cell response. The Patterson protocol they're using won't work because it doesn't address the underlying cellular dysregulation." Robert stood up, suddenly alert. Those details weren't public knowledge. Even the name of Alex's condition was rarely mentioned outside medical circles. "Who are you?" he demanded. "My name is Ellie Martinez. My brother had a similar condition 2 years ago." Robert studied her more carefully. She was younger than he'd first thought, probably around 17. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, met his without wavering. "How do you know about my son's condition?" "My mom works nights cleaning this floor. She overheard the doctors talking." Ellie shifted her weight but maintained eye contact. "I'm not supposed to be here. She'd lose her job if anyone found out she discussed a patient." "So why risk it?" Robert asked, his voice hard. "Because I recognize the patterns. The conventional treatments don't work for this variant." She hesitated. "And because no one should have to go through what my family did, searching for answers while time runs out." Something in her voice, the quiet certainty perhaps, made Robert pause. He'd learned to read people in business, to sense when someone was genuine or trying to sell him something they didn't believe in themselves. This girl believed what she was saying. "You said your brother had a similar condition." "Had?" "He's in remission now. It took us 18 months to find the right approach." "And you think this approach would work for Alex?" "I think it could. The cases share key markers, but I'd need to see his full medical file to be certain." Robert laughed humorlessly. "Right. And I'm supposed to hand over my son's confidential medical information to a teenager I met in a hospital garden." "I understand your skepticism, Mr. Keller," She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folder. "These are my research notes on my brother's case. I've been studying autoimmune disorders for the past 3 years." Robert took the folder reluctantly. Inside were detailed medical notes, research papers, and hand-drawn diagrams of cellular structures. The level of detail was impressive, but it could have been copied from textbooks for all he knew. "Look, I appreciate whatever this is, but my son has the best medical team on the East Coast." "The same team that just told you they're out of options?" Ellie asked quietly. Robert felt a flash of anger, then deflation. She wasn't wrong. "What exactly are you proposing?" "An alternative treatment protocol focusing on targeted immunotherapy combined with metabolic intervention." She spoke confidently, without the hesitation most people would have using such terminology. "The approach addresses both the autoimmune response and the underlying cellular dysfunction." "And why hasn't my son's medical team considered this miraculous treatment?" "Because it's not approved by the FDA yet. The components have been studied separately, but the specific combination we used was improvised." "Improvised?" Robert repeated flatly. "You experimented on your brother." "We had no choice. The approved treatments weren't working." For the first time, Ellie's composure cracked slightly. "My parents mortgaged our house to pay for treatments that failed. By the time traditional medicine gave up on him, we had nothing left except what we could figure out ourselves." Robert studied her face. There was determination there, and intelligence, but no trace of the desperation or fanaticism he associated with medical quackery. "You said your brother is in remission. For how long?" 14 months now. His last 3 blood panels showed normal immune function." It could be coincidence. It could be a natural remission that had nothing to do with whatever amateur science this girl had concocted. But Alex didn't have the luxury of waiting for more conventional solutions. Robert made a decision. "I need to check your background before this conversation goes any further. Give me your full name and contact information." Ellie hesitated, then nodded. "Eleanor Martinez. I live at 247 Oak Ridge Avenue, apartment 3B. I'm a senior at Eastside High School." Robert entered the information into his phone. "I'll have someone look into your background. If what you're saying checks out, we can continue this discussion." "Mr. Keller, Alex doesn't have much time. His liver enzymes—" "How do you know about his liver function?" Robert interrupted sharply. "The patterns are consistent with stage 3 of the disease. My brother's progression was similar." She looked at him steadily. "Check my background if you need to, but please don't wait too long. I know what those machines upstairs are telling you about your son's condition." Robert felt cold. She was right again. Alex's liver function had been deteriorating rapidly over the past week. "I'll be in touch tomorrow," he said finally. "Don't contact anyone else about this in the meantime." "I won't. Thank you for listening." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Keller, I know you have every reason to doubt me, but I also know what it's like to watch someone you love slip away while doctors shake their heads. Sometimes the answers come from unexpected places." After she left, Robert remained on the bench, turning the folder over in his hands. He should throw it away. He should focus on convincing Dr. Watkins to try the experimental treatment being tested at Johns Hopkins. He should be upstairs with his son, not entertaining false hope from a teenage girl. Instead, he called David Chen, his head of security. "David, I need a background check. Full spectrum. Academic records, family history, social media, everything. Name is Eleanor Martinez." He gave the address. "I need it by morning." "Problems, sir?" David asked. "I'm not sure yet. Just be thorough." Robert ended the call and flipped through the folder again. The pages were worn at the edges, as if they'd been handled many times. Some of the notes were written in pencil, the handwriting evolving from page to page, documentation spanning years rather than something hastily assembled to create an impression. His phone rang. It was his ex-wife, Catherine. "I just spoke with Dr. Watkins," she said without preamble. "Is it true? They're giving up. They're not giving up, Robert replied automatically. They're reassessing. Don't give me corporate speak, Robert. Is our son dying? The direct question hit him like a physical blow. Not if I can help it, he said finally. What does that mean? Have you found something? Robert looked at the folder in his hand. Maybe. It's too early to say. Don't you dare hold back information about Alex from me, Catherine warned. I'm not. When I have something concrete, you'll be the first to know. After ending the call, Robert returned to the hospital room where machines monitored his son's failing body. Alex was awake, scrolling through his phone with the detached interest of someone who had spent too much time in hospital rooms. Hey, Dad, he said, his voice thin but still carrying traces of the energetic boy he'd been just months ago. You look stressed. More than usual, I mean. Robert forced a smile. Just work stuff. How are you feeling? Alex shrugged. About the same. Dr. Watkins didn't look happy earlier. Doctors always look serious. It's their default expression. Dad. Alex set down his phone. I heard what he said about running out of options. Robert sat on the edge of the bed. Dr. Watkins doesn't know everything. We're exploring alternatives. Like what? Robert hesitated. He couldn't mention Ellie yet. It would be cruel to offer his son hope based on an unverified claim from a stranger. There are always other approaches, other specialists. He squeezed Alex's hand. I built my company by finding solutions where others saw dead ends. This is no different. Alex nodded, but didn't look convinced. You know, if this doesn't work out, it will, Robert interrupted. But if it doesn't, Alex continued firmly, I need you to be okay. Promise me you won't let this destroy you. Robert felt his throat tighten. His 16-year-old son was preparing him for bereavement. It was unbearable. We're not having this conversation, he said. Because you're going to get better. Alex sighed. Sure, Dad. Whatever you say. Later that night, after Alex had fallen asleep, Robert sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, reviewing the contents of Ellie's folder more carefully. Some of the research referenced studies he'd never heard of, approaches that seemed simultaneously innovative and reckless. His phone buzzed with a text from David. Background check preliminary results complete. E. Martinez has unusual profile. Call when convenient. Robert stepped into the hallway. What did you find? She's legitimate, in a manner of speaking, David said. 17 years old, straight-A student at Eastside High. Won the regional science fair 3 years running, but turned down admission to the Peterson STEM Academy. Mother works 2 jobs, including night shift custodial at Memorial General as claimed. Father left 6 years ago. Younger brother Jason was hospitalized 2 years ago with an autoimmune condition. And this is where it gets interesting. The brother made a full recovery after being discharged to hospice care. Medical billing records show they stopped conventional treatment, but he recovered anyway. There's a gap in his medical history that coincides with what the girl described. What about her scientific credentials? That's the other anomaly. She's published 3 papers in respected journals under the pseudonym E. M. Reyes. I confirmed the email trail. It's definitely her. She's self-taught. No formal training beyond high school science courses. Robert processed this information. So she's either a prodigy or very lucky. Based on the academic assessment, I'd lean toward prodigy. Her school records show testing in the exceptional range, but the family couldn't afford the private programs recommended for her. Robert looked through the glass at his sleeping son. Keep digging. I want to know everything about this girl and her brother's treatment before I make any decisions. But as he ended the call, Robert knew he'd already made a decision. When conventional wisdom failed, unconventional approaches were all that remained. In business, he'd made his fortune by recognizing opportunity in unexpected places. Now, his son's life might depend on whether he could recognize it again. Tomorrow, he would contact Ellie Martinez and hear her out completely. It might be a fool's errand, but he was rapidly running out of options. And for Alex, He would try anything, even trusting a teenage girl with a notebook full of unproven theories and the steady gaze of someone who believed she could change the world. The next morning, Robert arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. He'd spent most of the night reviewing Ellie's research and consulting with David about the background check. Everything checked out. The girl was exactly who she claimed to be. He called the number she'd provided. "Mr. Keller," Ellie answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. "Have you made a decision?" "I want to hear more about this treatment protocol," Robert said, "but I need to see evidence, not just theories." "I understand. I can bring my brother's complete medical records and the documentation of our approach. Bring it to the hospital at noon, conference room B on the 3rd floor. I'll make sure you have clearance." When he hung up, Robert checked on Alex, who was still sleeping. The night nurse reported no changes, which meant no improvement, but also no decline. Robert took that as a small victory. At precisely noon, Ellie arrived carrying a worn backpack. She wore the same hoodie as yesterday, but had paired it with slightly nicer jeans, as if she'd made an effort to look more presentable without having many options. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said as she took a seat across from Robert at the conference table. "Let's be clear," Robert began. "I've verified your identity and your brother's medical history. What I haven't verified is whether your intervention had anything to do with his recovery." Ellie nodded. "That's fair." She pulled several folders from her backpack and arranged them on the table. "This is Jason's complete medical record. The first 3 folders cover his diagnosis and conventional treatment period. The 4th contains all our documentation during the alternative protocol." Robert opened the first folder. It contained medical records showing a diagnosis similar to Alex's, a rare autoimmune disorder attacking multiple systems. The progression was disturbingly familiar. "Your brother was 17 when this started?" 15. He's 17 now." Ellie's expression softened. "He was always the healthy one. Played baseball, never even had the flu. Then one day he couldn't get out of bed. 3 weeks later, he was in the ICU." Robert flipped through the treatment notes. Jason had undergone many of the same protocols as Alex, with similar disappointing results. It says here he was discharged to hospice care. The doctors had given up. They gave him 6 weeks. Ellie's voice remained steady, but her hands tightened around the edge of the table. "My parents brought him home to make him comfortable." Robert studied her face. "But you had other ideas." "I'd been researching his condition since the diagnosis. I found patterns the specialists missed because they were too focused on standard protocols." Ellie opened the 4th folder. "This is where we diverged from conventional medicine." The folder contained detailed notes, charts tracking daily symptoms, and medication adjustments. The protocol combined elements of immunotherapy with nutritional interventions and off-label use of several medications. "This is highly unorthodox," Robert said after reviewing the materials. "It was our only option," Ellie replied simply. "And you developed this yourself? At 16? "I didn't create it from nothing. I combined existing research in ways that addressed Jason's specific condition." She pointed to a series of journal articles she'd included. These studies showed promising results for individual components, but no one had tested the combination. "Because it's dangerous," Robert countered. "Drug interactions alone could have killed your brother." "He was already dying," Ellie said quietly. "We monitored him constantly. Mom learned to draw blood so we could check his levels daily. When something didn't work, we adjusted." Robert leaned back in his chair. The desperation behind her actions was familiar. Hadn't he been ready to fly Alex to any country? Try any treatment that might help? "Let's say I believe you. What exactly are you proposing for Alex?" "A modified version of Jason's protocol, adjusted for Alex's specific condition and current state." Ellie pulled out another folder. "I've already drafted the approach based on what I know about his case, but I'd need to see his complete medical file to finalize it." Robert hesitated. Sharing Alex's medical information crossed a line. Before we go any further, I need to consult with Alex's doctor. Dr. Watkins won't approve, Ellie said immediately. He's published papers defending the Patterson protocol. Admitting it doesn't work for certain variants would contradict his research. Robert frowned. That's a serious accusation. It's not about ethics, it's human nature. We invest in our beliefs. Ellie met his gaze. You built your company on disruptive technology. You know how established systems resist change. The comparison surprised Robert. Few people understood the core philosophy behind his business success. What do you know about my company? Keller Technologies revolutionized data security by challenging industry standards everyone thought were unbreakable. Ellie shrugged. I follow tech developments. Your approach to encryption was elegant. Robert felt a reluctant smile form. You understand encryption algorithms? Enough to appreciate good design. She tapped the folder with her treatment plan. This is no different. Sometimes the solution requires questioning established patterns. Before Robert could respond, the door opened and Dr. Watkins entered, his expression darkening when he saw Ellie. Mr. Keller, I wasn't aware you had scheduled a consultation. His tone was professionally polite, but cool. This is Ellie Martinez, Robert said, choosing his words carefully. She's sharing some research that might be relevant to Alex's case. Dr. Watkins glanced at the folders spread across the table. I see. Ms. Martinez, do you have medical credentials I should be aware of? No, doctor, Ellie replied, but I've extensively researched this specific variant of autoimmune disorder. Research requires training and context, Dr. Watkins said dismissively. Mr. Keller, may I speak with you privately? In the hallway, Dr. Watkins didn't hide his concern. Robert, I understand your desperation, but entertaining untested theories from unqualified individuals can be dangerous. Her brother had a similar condition and recovered, Robert countered. Spontaneous remissions happen. It's rare but documented. That doesn't mean whatever home remedy they tried was responsible. Watkins placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. We're pursuing every legitimate avenue. The team at Johns Hopkins might accept Alex into their trial program. Might? Robert repeated. When will we know? They're reviewing his case this week. Watkins hesitated. But I need to be honest. His condition may disqualify him. The trial excludes patients with advanced organ involvement. Robert felt the familiar frustration rising. So we wait while my son gets worse. I'm doing everything I can, Watkins insisted, but I strongly advise against pursuing unregulated treatments. At best, they waste precious time. At worst, they could accelerate Alex's decline. When Robert returned to the conference room, Ellie was carefully repacking her folders. He told you to stay away from me, she said. It wasn't a question. He's concerned, Robert replied. I understand. I'd be suspicious too. She zipped her backpack. But while the medical establishment debates which approved treatment to try next, Alex's condition is progressing. The liver enzyme patterns suggest he has weeks, not months. Robert stiffened. Dr. Watkins hasn't indicated the timeline is that short. They rarely give exact timeframes. Too much liability. Ellie stood up. Mr. Keller, I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. Verify everything I've shown you. Talk to Jason's doctors. See for yourself that his recovery defied all medical expectations. Robert studied her for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Really? The question seemed to catch her off guard. What do you mean? You're risking a lot. Your mother's job, potential legal issues for practicing medicine without a license. What's your angle? Ellie's expression hardened slightly. Not everyone has an angle, Mr. Keller. Sometimes people help because they can. In my experience, your experience is with people who want something from you, she interrupted. I don't want anything except to prevent another family from going through what mine did. The sincerity in her voice was difficult to dismiss. Robert made a decision. "I'll look into your brother's case. If what you've shown me checks out, we'll continue this conversation." Ellie nodded and headed for the door, then paused. "Mr. Keller, time really is a factor. Jason's recovery took longer because we started late. The sooner we begin with Alex, the better his chances." After she left, Robert called David again. "I need you to verify medical records for Jason Martinez. Focus on his discharge to hospice care and subsequent recovery, and I want to speak with his doctors directly." "That might require some creative approaches," David cautioned. "Medical privacy laws." "I don't care what it takes," Robert interrupted. "Just get it done." That evening, Robert sat beside Alex's bed, watching his son pick disinterestedly at hospital food. "You should go home and sleep in a real bed," Alex told him. "These chairs are destroying your back." "I'm fine," Robert insisted. "How are you feeling today?" Alex shrugged. "The same. Maybe a little more tired." He pushed the food tray away. "Dad, what was that meeting about earlier? The nurses were talking about some girl you brought in." Robert hesitated. "Just exploring some research options." "What kind of options?" Alex pressed. "Nothing concrete yet." Robert changed the subject. "Your mother's coming tomorrow. She's bringing that ridiculous chess set you like." "The Lord of the Rings one?" Alex smiled slightly. "She thinks it's stupid." "Which is precisely why she's bringing it." They both chuckled, a moment of normalcy in the sterile hospital room. Then Alex winced, his hand moving to his side. "What is it?" Robert asked immediately. "Just the usual." Alex's attempt at a reassuring smile failed as another wave of pain hit him. "Maybe you could ask the nurse for something." Robert pressed the call button, his chest tight with familiar helplessness as he watched his son struggle through the pain. By the time the nurse arrived with medication, Alex's forehead was beaded with sweat. Later that night, after Alex had fallen into a medicated sleep, Robert's phone rang. It was David. "I've verified the Martinez boy's medical history," he said without preamble. "It's legitimate. He was discharged to hospice care 18 months ago with terminal prognosis. His doctors cannot explain his recovery." "Could it have been a misdiagnosis?" "No, the pathology reports are conclusive. Same condition as Alex, advanced stage." Robert looked at his sleeping son. "And now?" "Full remission. Latest checkup shows normal function across all systems." David paused. "There's something else. I spoke with one of his doctors off the record. He admitted they've been trying to understand what happened, but the family has been evasive about what they did during the hospice period." Robert thought about Ellie's detailed records, the careful documentation of a treatment protocol no doctor had approved. "What would you do?" he asked quietly. "If it were your child?" David didn't hesitate. "I'd try anything with a chance of success, but verify everything first." After ending the call, Robert made his decision. He texted Ellie, "Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m. Same place, bring everything." Her response came almost immediately. "I'll be there. Thank you for giving this a chance." Robert looked at Alex, pale and thin under the hospital blankets. The steady beep of monitors was the only sound in the room. Everything he'd built, everything he'd achieved, none of it mattered if he couldn't save his son. Tomorrow, he would take a risk unlike any business gamble he'd ever considered. He would put his trust in a teenage girl from across town with no credentials except a brother who should have died but didn't. It was either the most foolish decision of his life or the only one that mattered. The next morning, Robert arrived at the hospital to find Catherine already there, sitting beside Alex's bed. She looked up as he entered, her face drawn with worry. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "When was the last time you slept?" "I'm fine," Robert replied automatically. "How is he?" "The same. The nurse says his liver numbers are worse." Catherine's voice caught. "Robert, what are we going to do?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Ellie had arrived. I need to step out for a meeting, he said. Catherine frowned. A meeting? Now? It's about Alex, a potential treatment option. Her expression changed. Why didn't you tell me? What is it? It's complicated. I'll explain everything once I know more. Catherine stood up. No, I'm coming with you. Kath. He's my son too, Robert. I have a right to know. Robert hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but keep an open mind. When they reached conference room B, Ellie was already there, arranging papers on the table. She looked up in surprise when Robert entered with Catherine. This is my ex-wife, Catherine, Robert explained. Alex's mother. Mrs. Keller, Ellie said, extending her hand. I'm Ellie Martinez. Catherine shook her hand hesitantly. And you are? Ellie has proposed an alternative treatment approach for Alex, Robert said. Her brother had a similar condition and recovered. Alternative treatment? Catherine repeated, her tone instantly skeptical. Robert, what are you thinking? We need real medicine, not... Please, just listen, Robert interrupted. Ellie, show us what you've prepared. Ellie nodded and began presenting her treatment protocol. She'd refined it overnight, incorporating specific details from Jason's case that paralleled Alex's condition. She explained the approach in clear, simple terms, a combination of immunotherapy techniques, targeted nutritional support, and several medications used in new ways. The core issue is that standard protocols treat the symptoms but miss the underlying cellular miscommunication, Ellie explained. This approach addresses both simultaneously. Catherine listened with increasing attention. Unlike Robert, who focused on results, she had a background in biology and understood more of the technical aspects. This is theoretically sound, she admitted reluctantly after Ellie finished, but it's entirely experimental. How did you develop this without medical training? I studied everything I could find about autoimmune disorders after Jason was diagnosed, Ellie replied. When conventional treatments failed, I looked for patterns across research that hadn't been connected yet. And your brother is fully recovered? Yes. He's been in remission for 14 months. Catherine turned to Robert. Have you verified this? Yes. David checked everything. The recovery is documented, though the doctors can't explain it. Catherine studied Ellie with new interest. You realize what you're proposing is technically practicing medicine without a license? I'm not claiming to be a doctor, Ellie said carefully. I'm sharing research and our family's experience. Any medical decisions would obviously be made by Alex's physicians. Who would never approve this approach? Catherine noted. Exactly the problem, Robert said. Catherine paced the small room. So, what are you suggesting? That we somehow implement this protocol without medical supervision? Not exactly, Robert replied. I'm suggesting we find a doctor who's willing to consider unconventional approaches. And where do we find this miracle doctor who's willing to risk their license? Robert met her gaze steadily. I have some ideas. 3 hours later, Robert and Catherine sat across from Dr. Sarah Jensen in her private office. She was a former research colleague of Dr. Watkins who had left academic medicine to establish an integrative practice focusing on complex autoimmune cases. What you're describing is highly unorthodox, Dr. Jensen said after reviewing Ellie's protocol. I understand your desperation, but there are significant risks. We understand the risks, Robert said. What we need to know is, could it work? Dr. Jensen studied the documents again. The theoretical framework is sound. Some of these approaches are being studied individually, though not in this combination. She looked up at them. And you say this girl developed this? Her brother recovered using this protocol, Catherine confirmed. That's anecdotal evidence at best. Dr. Jensen frowned. However, in cases like Alex's, where conventional approaches have failed, there might be an ethical argument for trying. Would you supervise the treatment? Robert asked directly. Dr. Jensen hesitated. If, and this is a significant if, I were to consider this, I would need to examine Alex personally, review his complete medical history, and modify this protocol based on my assessment. Of course, Catherine agreed quickly. And you should understand that implementing this would require removing Alex from Dr. Watkins' care. It would create professional tension, to put it mildly. Dr. Jensen leaned forward. Most importantly, I can't promise results. This could fail just as completely as conventional treatments have. But there's a chance it could work, Robert pressed. Dr. Jensen nodded slowly. A chance? Yes. Let me review his records, and I'll give you my final decision tomorrow. Later that afternoon, Robert and Catherine stood outside Alex's room, arguing in hushed voices. This is insane, Catherine hissed. We're considering pulling him from one of the top hospitals in the country to pursue an untested treatment invented by a teenager. A teenager whose brother recovered from the same condition when conventional medicine failed, Robert countered. What other options do we have, Kath? You heard Watkins. Alex doesn't qualify for the Hopkins trial. His organs are already too compromised. Catherine leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. I'm scared, Robert. What if we make the wrong choice? I'm scared too, he admitted quietly. But doing nothing is also a choice, and it's one I can't live with. The door to Alex's room opened, and a nurse stepped out. Mr. Keller, Alex is asking for you both. Inside, Alex was sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. So, he said as they entered, when were you going to tell me about the secret meetings? Robert and Catherine exchanged glances. The nurses talk, Alex continued. Something about a girl with a miracle cure? And now you're meeting with different doctors. He looked between them. I'm the one who's sick. Don't I get a say in my treatment? Of course you do, Catherine said quickly. We were just exploring options before bringing them to you. What options? Alex asked. Because Dr. Watkins says we're running out of those. Robert sat on the edge of the bed. We've found an alternative approach. It's experimental, but it showed promise in a similar case. How experimental? Very, Catherine admitted. It's never been through clinical trials, but the patient who used it recovered completely. Alex was quiet for a moment. What does Dr. Watkins think? He doesn't know yet, Robert said. And honestly, he probably won't approve. But you think it could work? Alex looked at his father intently. Robert met his son's gaze. I think it's worth trying. Alex nodded slowly. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Robert and Catherine explained Ellie's approach, Dr. Jensen's potential involvement, and the risks of pursuing an unproven treatment. Alex listened carefully, asking surprisingly insightful questions. So this girl, Ellie, she figured all this out to save her brother? He asked finally. Yes, Robert confirmed. And he's okay now? Really okay? According to all medical tests, yes, he's in complete remission. Alex was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to meet her. Alex, I don't think, Catherine began. Mom, if I'm going to trust my life to someone's ideas, I want to meet them first. His voice was firm, despite his weakened state. I'm 16, not 6. I have a right to be part of this decision. Robert and Catherine exchanged glances again. He's right, Robert said quietly. The next day, Ellie entered Alex's hospital room looking nervous but determined. Catherine had reluctantly arranged for her to visit as a family friend to avoid raising questions with the hospital staff. So you're the genius everyone's talking about, Alex said as she approached his bed. Ellie smiled slightly. Not a genius, just stubborn. My dad says you saved your brother with this treatment. We saved him together. My whole family. Ellie sat in the chair beside his bed. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. But he recovered. Yes, completely. Alex studied her. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. The directness of the question seemed to surprise Ellie. Because I can. Because no one should have to go through this if there's an alternative. Even rich kids from Westbrook Hills? There was no malice in Alex's tone, just curiosity. This disease doesn't care how much money you have, Ellie replied. That's one thing I learned. Some things can't be bought. Alex nodded slowly. Tell me about the treatment, not the scientific part. My parents covered that. Tell me what it was like, the real part. For the next half hour, Ellie described the day-to-day reality of Jason's treatment. The strict schedule, the side effects, the small victories, and discouraging setbacks. She didn't sugarcoat the experience, but spoke with honesty that Alex clearly appreciated. It sounds hard, he said when she finished. It was, but the alternative was worse. Yeah. Alex looked down at his thin arms, the IV lines feeding into them. I get that. Later that afternoon, Dr. Jensen called Robert with her decision. After reviewing Alex's records and meeting with him briefly as a consulting physician, she agreed to oversee the alternative treatment protocol. We'll need to move quickly, she said, and you should prepare for significant resistance from Dr. Watkins and the hospital administration. Let me worry about that, Robert replied. The confrontation with Dr. Watkins was every bit as difficult as they'd anticipated. This is reckless and irresponsible, he insisted when Robert informed him of their decision to transfer Alex to Dr. Jensen's care. You're risking your son's life on an unproven theory. With all due respect, doctor, the proven theories aren't working, Robert replied calmly. Alex is getting worse every day. Sarah Jensen abandoned rigorous medicine years ago, Watkins argued. Her practice caters to desperate patients seeking miracle cures. She has board certifications in 3 specialties and continues to publish research, Catherine countered. And right now, she's offering our son a chance when you've admitted you have none left to give. Watkins turned to her, his expression softening. Catherine, I understand your desperation, but this path, it's giving in to false hope. Perhaps, she acknowledged, but it's still hope, and that's something Alex needs right now as much as medicine. Despite Dr. Watkins' objections and the hospital administration's concerns, Robert and Catherine moved forward with their plan. Using his considerable influence and the threat of legal action based on the hospital's admitted inability to offer further effective treatment, Robert secured Alex's release to Dr. Jensen's care. 3 days later, they began implementing Ellie's protocol under Dr. Jensen's supervision. The treatment center was smaller and less prestigious than Memorial General, but Dr. Jensen had assembled a team willing to follow the experimental approach. The first 2 weeks will be the hardest, Ellie had warned them. His body will fight the treatment before it starts to respond. She was right. Alex's condition initially worsened, with fever spikes and increasing pain that made Robert question their decision. Catherine practically lived at the treatment center, monitoring every medication and procedure with scientific precision. Are we doing the right thing? Robert asked her one night as they watched Alex sleep fitfully. I don't know, Catherine admitted, but we're doing something, after months of watching him slip away while following the right approach. I can live with that. By the end of the second week, Alex's liver enzymes showed a slight improvement, the first positive indicator since his diagnosis. It was a small change, possibly insignificant, but Dr. Jensen was cautiously optimistic. His inflammatory markers are also trending downward, she told them. It's too early to declare a response, but these are encouraging signs. That evening, Robert found Ellie in the small waiting area, reviewing Alex's latest lab results. You look exhausted, he observed. You should go home and rest. I'm fine, she insisted, not looking up from the papers. Your mother called. She's worried about you. Ellie finally looked up. Did she ask you to send me home? No. She said, and I quote, that girl is as stubborn as her brother. Might as well save your breath. Robert smiled slightly. She also said to remind you about your school project that's due next week. I'll finish it, Ellie muttered, returning to the lab results. Robert sat across from her. You know, I've offered to hire tutors to help you keep up with school. I don't need tutors, Ellie replied automatically. Then she sighed. Sorry. That sounded ungrateful. I appreciate the offer, but I learn better on my own. Robert studied her. This teenager who had upended their lives with her unconventional ideas and unshakable determination. Why are you really doing this, Ellie? The truth. She met his gaze steadily. I told you, because I can help. There's more to it than that. Ellie was quiet for a long moment. When Jason was sick, no one would listen to me. I was just a kid with crazy ideas. Even my parents only tried my approach when there was nothing left to lose. She looked down at the papers in her hands. Do you know what it's like to have the answer, but have everyone ignore you because of who you are? Robert thought about his early days in business. The doors closed in his face because he didn't have the right background or connections. Actually, he said quietly, I do. As days turned into weeks, small changes in Alex's condition became noticeable. His energy improved slightly. The periods of intense pain grew shorter. His liver enzymes continued to stabilize, and his inflammatory markers decreased steadily. It's working, Catherine said one morning as they reviewed the latest test results with Dr. Jensen. Isn't it? Dr. Jensen was cautiously optimistic. His numbers are definitely moving in the right direction, but we need to be careful not to overinterpret early results. But you've never seen this kind of improvement in similar cases, Robert pressed. No, Dr. Jensen admitted. I haven't. Word of Alex's treatment had spread through the medical community, creating divisions among his former doctors. Some were skeptical, attributing any improvement to coincidence or delayed effects of previous treatments. Others were curious, quietly requesting details of the protocol from Dr. Jensen. Dr. Watkins remained firmly opposed. This approach undermines decades of research, he told Robert during a tense phone call. Even if Alex shows temporary improvement, you're setting a dangerous precedent. With all due respect, Robert replied, I'm not concerned with precedents. I'm concerned with my son. 1 month into the treatment, Alex was strong enough to take short walks around the treatment center. Ellie often accompanied him, the two teenagers developing an unexpected friendship despite their different backgrounds. So you've really never been to a concert? Alex asked during one of their walks. Ellie shrugged. Never had the time or money. Between school, research, and helping at home, there wasn't much left for entertainment. That's going to change, Alex declared. When I'm better, we're going to a concert. Your choice of band. You're assuming we'll still be hanging out when you're better, Ellie teased. Why wouldn't we? Alex seemed genuinely surprised. You saved my life. The treatment's saving your life. I just connected some dots. False modesty doesn't suit you, Alex said with a grin. Anyway, I'm not letting my personal medical genius disappear once I'm healthy. Who knows when I might need you again? Ellie smiled but said nothing. They both knew the reality. Once Alex recovered, their worlds would likely separate again. He would return to his private school and privileged life in Westbrook Hills. She would go back to Eastside High and her family's small apartment. Meanwhile, Robert's company was struggling without his full attention. His board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss concerns about leadership. They're talking about replacing me as CEO, Robert told Catherine after the meeting. Temporarily, they say, but we both know how these things work. Are you going to fight it? She asked. Robert looked through the window of Alex's room, where his son was laughing at something Ellie had said. No, the company will survive without me. Alex is what matters now. Catherine studied her ex-husband with new familiar respect. You've changed, Robert. Had to happen eventually, he replied with a small smile. As the second month of treatment progressed, Alex's improvement became undeniable. His major organ functions stabilized and his immune markers approached normal ranges. Dr. Jensen was now openly optimistic. "We're seeing a clear response pattern," she told them during their weekly review. "If this continues, we could begin reducing some medications within weeks." Robert turned to Ellie, who had become a fixture at these medical discussions. "You don't look as excited as I expected." "This is where we have to be most careful," she explained. "With Jason, we reduced medications too quickly and had a serious setback. The protocol needs to taper gradually." "Dr. Jensen?" Catherine looked to the physician for confirmation. "Ellie's right," Dr. Jensen agreed. "The temptation with improving patients is to accelerate the process, but that could trigger a rebound effect." Later that evening, Robert found Ellie alone in the small conference room they'd converted into a study space for her. She was surrounded by textbooks and her laptop. "Working on that school project?" he asked. "Finished it. This is something else." She hesitated. "I'm applying for college scholarships." "Which schools?" "State universities mostly. Places with good biology programs I might actually afford." Robert sat across from her. "You know I would—" "I know," she interrupted. "And I appreciate it. But I need to do this my way." Robert nodded, respecting her independence. "Have you thought about what you want to study?" "Immunology, eventually. But I'll need to get through pre-med first." She looked down at her applications. "It's going to take a long time." "You're barely 17. Time is one thing you have plenty of." Ellie smiled slightly. "I guess so." "I've been thinking," Robert said, changing the subject, "about what happens after Alex recovers." "He goes back to his life. I go back to mine," Ellie said simply. "And what if there's another option?" Robert leaned forward. "What if we established a research foundation? Something to explore unconventional approaches to autoimmune disorders, with you involved from the ground up?" Ellie stared at him. "You're not serious." "Completely serious. What you've developed could help countless patients, but it needs proper research, clinical trials, peer review, all the things that will make the medical establishment take it seriously." "That would cost millions," Ellie said skeptically. "I have millions," Robert replied, "and for the first time in my life, I'm clear about how they should be used." Before Ellie could respond, Catherine burst into the room. "Alex's fever is spiking. Dr. Jensen wants us in his room now." The setback was severe. Alex's temperature had risen to 104 degrees, and his inflammatory markers had suddenly increased. Dr. Jensen ordered immediate supportive care while they tried to determine the cause. "This happened with Jason," Ellie said, reviewing Alex's charts frantically. "Almost exactly the same timing." "What caused it?" Catherine asked. "We never identified a specific trigger. It might be part of the healing process, a final inflammatory response before the body resets." Ellie looked up at Dr. Jensen. "We adjusted the interferon dosage and added a short course of targeted steroids." Dr. Jensen considered this. "That's aggressive, but might be necessary. Let me make some calculations." For the next 48 hours, Alex remained in critical condition. Robert and Catherine took shifts at his bedside, while Ellie worked continuously with Dr. Jensen to adjust the treatment. Neither slept more than a few hours. On the third day, Alex's fever broke. His lab values began to stabilize again, and by evening, he was awake and alert enough to speak. "That was dramatic," he joked weakly. "Did I scare everyone?" "Just a bit," Catherine said, squeezing his hand. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but different than before." He frowned, trying to articulate the sensation. "The pain feels cleaner somehow. Does that make sense?" Dr. Jensen, who had just entered the room, nodded. "Actually, it does. Sometimes as inflammation resolves, the quality of pain changes. It's a good sign." Follow-up tests confirmed Dr. Jensen's assessment. The inflammatory crisis appeared to have been a turning point. Alex's immune system was showing signs of genuine recovery, not just suppression from the medications. "We need to monitor him closely for at least another week," Dr. Jensen cautioned. But if these trends continue, I'd say we're seeing the beginning of true remission. 2 weeks later, Alex's improvement was clear enough that Dr. Jensen approved his first off-site visit, a carefully planned dinner at Robert's penthouse apartment. Ellie was invited, along with her mother and brother Jason. The evening highlighted the contrast between their worlds. Maria Martinez, Ellie's mother, initially seemed uncomfortable in the luxurious surroundings, but relaxed when Catherine engaged her in conversation about their children. Jason, now a healthy 17-year-old, connected immediately with Alex over video games and music. "It's strange seeing them together," Robert said to Ellie as they watched the boys from across the room. 6 months ago, they were both fighting for their lives. Now look at them, arguing about basketball teams like typical teenagers. "Jason doesn't remember much from when he was sick," Ellie said. "The mind protects itself, I guess." "And what about you? Do you remember everything?" Ellie's expression turned serious. "Every day, every test result, every time we thought we were losing him." She looked at Robert. "You'll remember too. Even when Alex is completely well, you'll never forget what it felt like to think you might lose him." Robert nodded. "It changes your perspective permanently." As everyone prepared to leave that evening, Robert asked Maria to stay behind for a moment. Catherine took the teenagers downstairs, giving them privacy. "Mrs. Martinez, I want to discuss something with you," Robert began. "I'm establishing a research foundation focused on autoimmune disorders, and I'd like Ellie to be involved." Maria looked surprised. "Involved how?" "Initially as a paid research assistant while she completes her education. Eventually, if she's interested, in a leadership role." Robert handed her a folder. "These are the preliminary plans, including a scholarship for Ellie and funding for her research." Maria studied the documents carefully. "This is very generous, Mr. Keller." "It's not charity," Robert said firmly. "Your daughter has unique insights that could help countless patients. I'm investing in that potential, not giving a handout." Maria smiled slightly. "Ellie would say the same thing. She's never wanted special treatment, just a fair chance." "That's exactly what this is, a chance to develop her work properly, with the resources she deserves." 1 month later, Alex was released from the treatment center. His condition wasn't completely resolved. He would need ongoing monitoring and maintenance therapy. But Dr. Jensen was confident in classifying him as in remission. "This is unprecedented in my experience," she told Robert and Catherine during their final consultation. "I've already been approached by 3 other families with similar cases. If you're serious about this foundation, there's significant interest in the medical community." "We're serious," Robert confirmed. "The paperwork is already filed." The Keller Foundation for Innovative Medical Research opened its doors 2 months later in a renovated building halfway between Westbrook Hills and Ellie's neighborhood. The location was deliberate, a physical bridge between 2 communities that rarely intersected. On opening day, Robert stood at the podium addressing the small crowd of medical professionals, potential patients, and media. 6 months ago, I believed that success meant controlling the biggest company or having the most resources," he began. "Then my son became ill with a condition that all my money and influence couldn't fix." He gestured to Alex, who sat in the front row beside Catherine, healthy and strong again. Alex's recovery didn't come from the most expensive hospital or the most prestigious doctors. It came because a brilliant young woman from across town refused to accept limitations, medical, social, or economic. Robert invited Ellie to join him at the podium. She looked different now, more confident in a simple but professional outfit, though still with the same intensity in her eyes. The Keller Foundation will support unconventional thinkers like Ellie Martinez who see beyond established practices to find solutions others have missed, Robert continued. "We'll fund research, provide scholarships, and work to ensure that medical breakthroughs benefit all patients, regardless of their financial circumstances." As the foundation began its work, both families experienced significant changes. Catherine returned to university to complete the biology degree she had abandoned after marriage. Robert stepped back from day-to-day operations at his company, accepting a role as chairman while a new CEO managed the business. Ellie started college that fall, dividing her time between classes and her research position at the foundation. Jason's health remained excellent, and he developed an interest in patient advocacy, often speaking to groups about his experience. Alex returned to school, but with a new perspective. He volunteered at a free clinic on weekends and started a student group focused on healthcare access issues. The experience had transformed him from a privileged teenager with limited awareness of others' struggles to a young man with genuine empathy and purpose. 6 months after the foundation opened, Robert and Ellie stood in the new research lab, reviewing preliminary results from their first clinical trial. 3 patients showing similar response patterns, Ellie noted. It's still early, but promising. Just like you said it would be, Robert replied. Ellie smiled. Science takes time. We're just getting started. Speaking of time, Robert said, Alex mentioned you finally agreed to go to that concert. He was very persistent, Ellie admitted. Said something about a promise made during his recovery. He keeps his promises. Robert paused. Like his father is learning to do. Ellie looked up from her notes. You've kept every promise you made to me and my family. Not the point. I'm learning to make better promises in the first place. Robert looked around the lab, a physical manifestation of his changed priorities. Success looks different to me now. How so? Ellie asked. It's not about what I can accumulate or control. It's about what I can make possible for others. He smiled at the young woman who had walked into his life 6 months ago and changed everything. A very wise teenager taught me that. As they returned to their work, Robert reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. His son's illness, terrible as it was, had forced him to re-evaluate everything he valued. A chance encounter with a determined girl from the wrong side of town had not only saved Alex's life, but had opened doors to helping countless others. The walls that had once separated their worlds, wealth, status, education, opportunity, hadn't disappeared entirely. But they had found something more important on the other side. A shared purpose that transcended those differences and joined their lives in ways neither could have imagined. It wasn't the ending Robert would have written for himself a year ago. It was better.